Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Your MC for tonight's City Talk is the CEO of Emergent Global and author of The Leading Edge. She's renowned for driving transformative initiatives in leadership development, diversity and innovation across corporate, non-profit and public sectors, and for empowering leaders worldwide to navigate change and drive real-world impact. Would you please welcome Holly Ransom.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this City Talks, the climate and nature crisis, what Australia does matters. Tonight we have an incredible program in store for you, but before we get underway, I want to acknowledge that, of course, we are meeting on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I want to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging, as well as acknowledging any First Nations people that we have here participating in City Talks with us tonight. It is my delight to be back as host for City Talks tonight with you, and boy, do we have an action-packed, insight-rich program in store for you. I'll give you a little sense, a little tease of what's to come over the course of this evening. Shortly, we're going to hear from two of the most renowned and inspiring women who work tirelessly on global climate action, climate justice, and advocacy, Christiana Figueres and Jennifer Robinson. Christiana and Jennifer are going to be in conversation to discuss the new frontlines of climate action and unpack the levers and change for tackling climate crisis in the challenging years ahead. Jennifer Robinson will then join us on stage to tell us more about the next wave of climate action and specifically climate justice, how the law is being increasingly used as a powerful tool for climate action as we move into 2025 and beyond. To frame up tonight's talk, we are very fortunate to have with us award-winning filmmaker Damon Gameau, who's going to give us a poignant reminder of why our actions now will equate to the legacy that we end up leaving our children and our grandchildren. And he'll do that very powerfully by retelling the story of humans and nature. We will also hear from the Lord Mayor of Sydney, Clover Moore, who has led the City of Sydney through an incredible 20 years of decisive action on climate change. And we'll talk about how the city is recommitting itself to that action through the updated Environmental Strategy 2025 to 2030. Matt Keane, the chair of the Climate Change Authority, is here tonight to reinforce the whole theme of tonight's event, why decisive climate action is needed now and matters more than ever. I'll also be joined by a panel of some of Australia's most committed and inspiring climate and nature advocates. And finally, we're going to hear some power talks from groundbreaking leaders who are bringing climate and nature plans to life right here in Sydney. All right, without further ado, let's begin. Please welcome Auntie Joan Bell from the Metropolitan Land Council to give us our official welcome to country.
Thank you. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Good evening, peoples. I'd just like to know that you're with me. I was invited to come and welcome you to my country. You see, this is my country. Gadigal country is my country. As a Gadigal elder, it is my privilege and it is my right, and it's a pleasure to be here. Before I get going, I always acknowledge the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, because Metro is the body for the protection and preservation of all Aboriginal culture and heritage within its boundaries. That includes Sydney CBD and surrounding local 24 areas, from Canterbury Bankstown to Cessnock. And we are proud to acknowledge all respective traditional owners and custodians for this place that is now called Sydney. A wee bit about me. My name is Joan Bell. My family and friends call me Auntie Ding. Ding Bell. I'm very proud to be called Auntie Ding. Everybody. That's all they know me by, Auntie Ding. I am a very proud Wiradjuri Gadigal woman. Wiradjuri from my mum. My mum was the most proudest of Wiradjuri ladies who lived on a little mission up in central west New South Wales, and it was called Bulgandra Mine Aboriginal Reserve. She was there for a time until her dad, my grandfather, was told to move the kids because the Protection Board was coming to take them. He wasted no time. Was only gone a short time, and that very night the Protection Board came and lifted all the kids. If it wasn't for my grandfather's quick action, I would be a stolen generation. Gadigal I get from my dad. This is my dad's country, Gadigal country. They lived down on Sydney Cove. That's where all the humpies were, until the prominent people came in, built homes and moved them. It was a fact that they didn't like to see Koori people, black faces running around. So they were moved. They were taken to Parramatta's Natives Institute. And when we asked our elders, what is Parramatta's Natives Institute? And we were told it's a welfare place where they take all the kids. And then in 1845, they were taken by Reverend John Cartwright to Pajong, Gundingara country, up near Gunning, New South Wales, to work. We honour our Gadigal Eora elders and leaders, including Barangaroo, Pemaway, and many others who fought the first boat people who landed in Sydney Cove in 1770 and 1778. My respects to Gadigal elders past and present. We honour our matriarchs and patriarchs. Because of them, we can, always was, and always will be, Aboriginal land. My respects to all elders, to all peoples of other nations and other First Nations here tonight. Welcome. This welcome to country is made in the peace of harmony, is made in the spirit of peace and harmony with all peoples of modern Sydney. Our aim as local custodians is to establish an atmosphere of mutual respect through the acknowledgement of our ancestors and the recognition of our right to declare our special place in the pre- and post-history of the Sydney region. Respect. I talk a lot about respect, especially to my family, to my kids, and to my grandkids. You see, I am a mother of 10. I am a grandmother, a great-grandmother, and a great-great-grandmother of 82 grandkids. So, thank you. So I'm filling my paddock. I'm not going anywhere. My bloodline is here to stay. I'm keeping the dream alive for my ancestors. They're proud of me. Respect is taking responsibility for the past, the present, and the future. Evidence of our occupation, ownership, and nationhood can be seen everywhere throughout our country. Our signature is in the land, not just in our DNA. And I would like to acknowledge the traditional lands we are all standing on today, the land we all walk together on as one. This is the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, one of many nations across this beautiful land that our people have existed on for thousands of years. I want to acknowledge our elders, past and present, our mothers, our fathers, and our future generations, our children and our children's children. I want to recognise our people's strength, wisdom, and knowledge, and the pride I feel as being a descendant of the world's continuous living culture. Let's move forward for our children's children and our future generations, and let's all walk the bridge of harmony together and embrace all cultures, clans, colours and faiths of this world. I am thankful to be here today to share my yarn with you and ask for you all to understand that we as Aboriginal people are peoples of humanity, one spirit, and we want all peoples to embrace our belief that our existence is to be only the carer of this beautiful land, as nature is our mother and we are only the sucklings of her breast. With this welcome, we ask that you all will respect the law, L-O-R-E, of the land, and the law, L-A-W, of the country. Give honour, be respectful, be polite, be gentle and patient with all. Respect is everything, living and growing. In our teachings, we were taught that respect is to be humble and civil. My mum used to always say to us, you must be humble and civility costs you nothing. And when you are humble and you are civil to people, you don't need much else. Please, look after the land, sea and rivers. Then the land, sea and rivers will look after you. This is my welcome to you from the heart. I welcome you to the land of my Gadigal ancestors. I welcome you to my Gadigal country. Welcome to my country. Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie. So, my life revolves around telling stories and understanding how stories impact our personal lives and how they impact culture. All of us, every day, tell a story about who we are in our heads. And that impacts how we interact with others, how much money we think we're worth, where we're confident in certain areas and where we're anxious in other areas. Any psychologist will tell you that you change that story, you change your life. But this also relates to the larger collective stories that we all tell. These are the stories that shape our cultural behaviours, the stories that inform the design of our technologies, of our economic system. And tonight I want to talk about a story that most people aren't even aware they're inhabiting. See, we've built an entire civilization off a story that tells us that human beings are separate and superior to nature. It is a story that has taken us so close to the brink of an unimaginable crisis that our survival relies on us telling a new story. So, once upon a time, in a land far away, and right here actually, on the lands that we're gathered tonight, The majority of people on planet Earth had a deep reverence and respect for nature. They saw very little separation between themselves and the world around them. As we know, Indigenous Australians saw themselves as custodians of the land, while the ancient Chinese referred to themselves as reverent guests of nature. Even prominent figures of Rome, like Seneca or Ovid, argued that mining shouldn't be permissible as it was too abusive to the natural world. But then things started to change. A new craze called Christianity began to take hold. Word spread that their one God sat above and outside nature, and that God had given people dominion over the earth. The world was made for the sake of man, that it may serve him, said the Bishop of Paris in the early 12th century. The Christian craze had now infiltrated Europe and was beginning its dominant march into the Americas. But wait, there's more, said a couple of fancy-looking men in the 1600s. They told the people that they were from the scientific revolution and they could empower the people even further. We must hound nature in her wanderings, said the first man, Francis Bacon, the father of modern science. We must find a way at length into her inner chambers. We must reveal the secrets still locked in nature's bosom, subdue her, make her your slave. Yes, said the men, we like the sound of that. The next man chimed in. He was René Descartes, the father of modern philosophy. He added that animals are mindless machines to be exploited and mastered at will. Excellent, said the people. Now we don't have to feel bad about whipping our oxen or farming our animals. The influence of these two men, coupled with the Christian craze, meant that nature was no longer seen as a living thing to be revered and respected, but instead as a machine to be manipulated for the benefits of mankind. This was a new and exciting story that set free natural resources for humans to achieve social and economic progress, even if obtained through violent and suppressive acts. But this new story was particularly enticing to the emerging capitalists at the time, because a nature devoid of reverence and respect was much easier to commodify. And commodify they did. The humans went to work entering and penetrating all of those inner chambers. They tunneled her bosom for coal and metals. They scraped at her skin with their tractors. They took chainsaws to her forests of follicles and they plundered her waters with their waste. The new story had spread across the globe. The humans had asserted their dominance, they built wondrous things and improved the lives of billions of people, particularly in specific regions. Until one day, their scientists began to notice. Her animals are decreasing. Her atmosphere is heating. Her soils are eroding. Our research is foreboding. But still, the humans carried on. You see, they couldn't hear the scientists because the facts don't matter much if they don't fit the story. And the story was deeply embedded now. In 2019, a prominent evangelist tells his followers that refusing to use fossil fuels hurts God's feelings. The story was so embedded that the humans measured their success by financial metrics alone, while the living world that allowed the gains in those metrics was being eviscerated out of sight. And the story was so embedded that when researchers looked at the names of trees, birds, flowers, other key words relating to nature, used across millions of books, movies and songs from 1900 to 2014, they found a dramatic decline in the use of those words across that period. Nature was being hounded in her wanderings, and yet the humans remained trapped in their story, trapped in their cultural programming. And so when those same scientists resorted to blocking traffic or tying themselves to poles, or screaming that the Amazon rainforest is nearing a tipping point that will turn her into a savanna, still the humans did nothing. Because to them, those trees that were home to millions of species of insects, those trees that communicate to each other by underground fungal networks, those trees that transpire moisture in the air to create rainfall that will feed crops in countries thousands of kilometres away, to them those trees were just timber for decking, or pulp for toilet paper, space for more cows. Those trees were worth more dead than alive, because that's what the story had told them. But then something remarkable happened. It started with the children who began to skip school and take to the streets. It started with the farmers who chose to stop fighting nature and instead rebuild their soils. It started with the people who used the sun, the wind, water to start powering their lives. And it started when nature herself, through fires and storms, through droughts and rising waters, forced her way back into the people's lives and demanded their respect. A new regenerative story about human beings and nature was emerging. But of course, it wasn't a new story at all. It was the retelling of an old story. But this time, the story was supported by the science. And it was telling the people that every breath they took was dependent on trees or phytoplankton, and that trillions of bacteria lived on them and in them and kept them alive. Viewing humans as separate to the natural world was now empirically false. Humans are nature. But the science was also telling them that plants could see and hear. They could learn and store memories. That dolphins gossiped and spoke in local dialects. Elephants told ceremonies for dead relatives. And termites had built an underground metropolis the size of the United Kingdom. The same scientific inquiry that had led to domination and extraction had gone so deep into nature's bosom that it was revealing her secrets. And her secrets were divulging that she was anything but mechanistic, that she was deserving of the utmost reverence and respect, and that the original story had been right all along. And so now perhaps the humans would no longer refer to nature as an unruly female to be tamed, or an it to be exploited, but would refer simply to nature as kin. Now, nobody knows how this new but old story ends, because it is still being written. But if it is to have the Hollywood ending, if we are to break free of our cultural programming and pull off the miraculous comeback when all seems lost, then the new story will need to be rapidly spread throughout the culture. It will need to be embedded into all levels of curriculum. So we teach our children to see the world as a living system, not as a machine full of stocks and commodities. It will need to inform a redesign of the economy so it values nature and reflects the true environmental costs of the materials that we all use. And crucially, the new story will need to be amplified by the storytellers, the musicians, the artists, those people that can create the emotional connection to the living world once again and paint visions of a nature-filled future that people can see and feel and strive for. There can be no movement unless we move people. Because stories shape culture. Culture shapes leaders, leaders shape policies, and policies shape the system. But it starts with a story. And perhaps, just perhaps one day, a few hundred years from now, historians will look back to this time and they'll see that amongst the chaos and the fear and the deep wounding and the extinctions. But there were groups of people that chose to turn the page and start to write a new chapter for humanity. A chapter full of diverse characters from a range of places and professions that came together to create a thriving, regenerative, ecological future. The end.
Thank you, Glenn. Wow. What a way to kick off proceedings. Please keep the applause going one more time for Damon Gameau. What a powerful story. There's so much in that beautiful storytelling, but that idea that if you change your story, you change your world. To change our story permits us the possibility of changing our world, and our very survival depends on it. And it all starts with that, and we need to rapidly begin retelling an old story and making sure we are all playing a role in how it ends, for that matter, for the better. Also, my thanks to Auntie Joan Bell for a beautiful welcome to country. One more round of applause for someone who's got 82 grandchildren in the paddock as well. Remarkable. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Sydney's longest-serving Mayor, Clover Moore AO. Throughout her public life, Clover has been a champion of progressive policies, and the City of Sydney has proven credentials to lead and support change. Strong and decisive action on climate change has been a cornerstone of the City of Sydney for the past 2 decades, together with their work to create and restore natural areas and reduce biodiversity loss in the urban environment. The Sustainable Sydney 2030-2050 plans is the city's commitment to this critical work. And now with the updated environmental strategy that covers this same period, 2025 to 2030, the city is recommitting to strong and decisive action on the climate and nature crisis. Here to tell us more, would you please give a warm Sydney welcome to the Lord Mayor, Clover Moore AO.
Thanks, Holly, and hello everyone, and a really warm welcome to our City Talk tonight. It's so good to see so many of you here, and so many of you who have come so often. We really, really appreciate it. Wasn't Damon so impressive? This is something we have to keep talking about, and we talk about it with you at least every year, and it's so good you're here. So I would like to thank Auntie Joan, Auntie Jing, for her welcome. I'd like to also acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and acknowledge the people of the many nations who live in our city. And I acknowledge and welcome Holly, who is our marvellous MC, our eminent speakers and panellists, and city councillors and members of parliament, and all of you, welcome. So, Australia is blessed with abundant wind, solar and tidal resources, an immense land mass and some of the world's largest reserves of critical minerals. Added to this, we are an educated and creative nation. But perhaps we lack gratitude. One side of politics tells us to ignore these free resources, while the other side has yet to convince the majority what they're good for. With the federal election in a month, Australians are being asked to choose between renewable energy and 7 taxpayer-funded nuclear reactors. How do we convince the public to stay the course with renewables when we live in an age of mis- and disinformation, where wars are fought over what is fact and what is fiction? Fossil fuel industries and their lobbyists are saying and doing anything to protect their interests. The big gas companies don't even pay royalties on half of the gas that Australia exports each year. This is literally billions of dollars going straight to the multinationals. No wonder they are hanging on. Unable to deny climate change any longer, the fossil industries and some politicians have found a furphy in nuclear reactors. This is a new tactic to obstruct and slow down the transition away from coal, oil and gas, and give the billionaires club unconscionable profits for decades. Our climate and environment are under attack, and coordinated and well-resourced ideological attack. Our world is already hotter. We're experiencing more intense storms, bushfires and floods. that are causing untold damage to nature and to homes, communities, businesses and public infrastructure. Even as the clean-up of Cyclone Alfred continues, the public and private cost of climate disasters continues to soar, and property in some parts of the country is uninsurable. It's been 10 years since COP21 in Paris resulted in the world's most significant binding treaty to address climate change. I was there among the mayors from over 40 major cities. Under the leadership of United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and the Special Envoy for Cities and Climate Change, Michael Bloomberg, for the first time ever, a conference of the parties focused on the work of cities to tackle climate change, and it has done so ever since. That's because more than half of the world's people live in cities, and cities are responsible for about 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions. At Paris, I spoke about our city's ambitious targets and our many climate initiatives, including sustainable transport, to tackle a major source of CO2 emissions, and the difficulties in constructing cycleways. Many city leaders related to that, but there was great support, even by their media, unlike Sydney at the time. The Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, said, "Stick at it. It's the right thing to do," and promptly took the plan from me and said, "I'm going to do that in London," and in fact he did. And the Sydney Morning Herald reported, and I quote, "Clover tells Paris the grass looks greener down here." And indeed it does. From no separated cycleways in 2004, Sydney now has 28 kilometres of cycleways across our city, with more to come. And habits are changing. On each weekday now, more than 10,000 people ride into our CBD. That's the equivalent of 10 full trains or 166 full buses. Our cycleways are taking fossil-burning vehicles off the road and saving tonnes of carbon. They are making cycling safer and easier, contributing to healthy lifestyles and improving our urban environment and air quality. In fact, over the past 20 years, long before most other Australian governments, the City of Sydney has been on a mission to eliminate carbon emissions in every way possible and to implement nature-based environmental solutions to create a sustainable and livable city. No matter who wins the federal election, we will not be deterred. In fact, we are even more determined to work faster and harder on climate actions and environmental protections, and to this end, we are revising our environment strategy. Under our updated draft environmental strategy, 2025 to 2030, we're shoring up our goal to drastically reduce emissions right across the city for residents and businesses. We want to reduce it by 70% right across the city by 2030 and to reach net zero in a decade. To date, we have cut emissions across our local government area by 41%, at the same time as our population has increased by 40%. Job numbers have grown by 35%, and our economy has expanded by 74%. And council's operations, we have reduced our emissions by 76%. Thank you. What Sydney does matters. Sydney is Australia's global city, and what Sydney does matters. Our long-term partnerships with building owners and tenants in the CBD are resulting in massive reductions in emissions and water use and cost savings. Thank you to the early adopters involved in these very valuable partnerships. The Better Buildings Partnership, and I know many of you would be here tonight, Sustainable Destination Partnership, Smart Green Apartments and City Switch. You are helping us make a big difference. We're also working with apartment owners and advocating for tenants so they're able to reduce energy use by making their homes more efficient, more comfortable and cheaper to run. And we're restoring our natural environment, creating new parks and planting 700 trees a year to reach 40% canopy and greening over cover by 2050, and to keep our city cooler, to protect biodiversity, and to create beautiful spaces where people can gather. Here you can see our urban forest that the Dirt Witches built in Barlow Street. It's between two city towers near Central Station. Planted by, as I said, the Dirt Witches, it's made up of 30 critically endangered species which once grew in the city, in this area, when the First Nations people were here. Under our revised environmental strategy, we are further reducing emissions in our own operations by electrifying our buildings and fleet, parks and pools, and eliminating all fossil gas use over the next 5 years, and by using less harmful refrigerants in air conditioning, and by continuing to improve our energy efficiency. At a time when cost of living is hurting, we owe it to people to do everything possible to make our current infrastructure as energy efficient as possible. We have already converted all of our street lights to LED, but new technology is pushing us further. Over the next few years, we'll replace our lights with even more energy efficient bulbs that last up to 23 years and will save 30% of energy and will be 30% more energy efficient. We're also installing smart controls to dim their brightness at quiet times, especially at night, saving more energy and reducing light impact on wildlife. Because our new building standards were adopted in 2022, major new hotels, shopping centres and office blocks are being designed to meet net zero energy standards. Also, we've changed our planning controls to ban the installation of indoor gas appliances in new residential developments, and we are reviewing the use of gas in new commercial developments too. We are repairing and regenerating our environment because cities and people depend on healthy, functioning, natural systems. In the next 5 years, we will further strengthen the environmental management of our own land. Our artificial wetlands, such as Sydney Park or Woolwash Park Pond, are examples of our restorative practices. Rehabilitated from their industrial past, they now provide habitat for local wildlife and migrating birds. They also act as biological stormwater filter, with plants and algae catching sediments and absorbing pollutants. We will install more gross pollutant traps to stop excess nutrients, rubbish and sediments from stormwater pouring into our harbour and other waterways. Because we're already experiencing the shocks and stresses of extreme weather events associated with climate change, we are adapting our operations and building resilience into our public assets. And we are integrating First Nations perspectives into our city's environmental management because, as Auntie Joan has told us, and Damon, First Nations people have been doing this for 65,000 years. They have that experience in caring for country, and we can learn from them. Last month, I received a handwritten letter from a Redfern constituent, which I'd like to quote from. Quote, I'm an almost 11-year-old girl writing to you because of a problem you probably heard of everywhere, climate change. That's one I've heard of. Right now, it's pouring and pouring with rain, and the wind is so strong. And I know what you're thinking, it's just a storm. Well, no, it's a power line and several trees crashing into the ground storm. She says, climate change is the world's #1 problem, and I believe it's time we humans, before everyone and everything goes extinct, get our brains up and start doing something. And she's right. And I hope she's here tonight. I put an invite under her door. So Aline, I hope you're here with your family. As 24-year-old Cal Glansing, Sutherland Shire councillor and environmentalist, reminded us in Climate Action Week in Sydney a few weeks ago, and I quote him, "We are the last generation with the ability to do something in the history of humanity," unquote. Despite climate change having been dragged into a culture war, despite the wealth of the fossil fuel industry and the power of the right-wing media, 40% of Australia's power is already coming from renewables, and within a year this will be 50%. This demonstrates that lots of people, whether to save money or to save the planet, I hope the latter, have already switched to renewables. So what Australia does matters. Let's maintain the momentum and demonstrate to the world that we are more than a lucky country. We are the country of urgent, responsible action, and we vote accordingly. Thank you.
Please,
Thank you so much, Clover Moore, everyone, Lord Mayor of Sydney, for that rousing address. Lord Mayor, I'd like to thank you for your conviction and your leadership on this topic, and not just for being here with us tonight, but for 2 decades' work of progress in this city, and equally for that continued commitment to this work. I also think something that was really important there in the context of why we're here at CityTalks tonight, the Lord Mayor mentioned that what cities do matters, that 50% of the world's population live in cities and that they're responsible for 75% of the world's global emissions. And in the context of tonight, Sydney matters. The leadership that can be provided in partnership with the people that are here in this room is absolutely critical to paving the way forward for a nation, for inspiring optimism across the globe, and hoping others will follow with a great sense of urgency that's required to meet the targets necessary for progress. With that, we're going to jump into the next component of our proceedings. We're going to have an in-conversation, an absolute treat, to have 2 significant global leaders who work tirelessly in this space to foster global rapid action on climate change and think deeply about the nature crisis and the human rights component of this conversation too. So joining us in conversation in a moment is going to be Christiana Figueres, who's an internationally recognised leader on climate change. You might recognise the name because she was Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate from 2010 right the way through to 2016, where she oversaw the delivery of the historic Paris Climate Agreement. And for this, she has received multiple accolades and awards. Today, she is co-founder of Global Optimism, co-host of the podcast Outrage and Optimism, and is the co-author of the recently published book, The Future We Choose, speaking of Damon's point about stories. Joining her in conversation is Jennifer Robinson, an award-winning Australian human rights barrister at Doughty Street Chambers in London. In 2024, she acted in the International Court, the advisory opinion proceedings on climate change and human rights, where she represented Vanuatu and the Marshall Islands, taking the world's biggest problem to the world's highest court. Christiana and Jennifer are going to discuss the new frontlines for climate action and unpack the levers for change for tackling climate change in the powerful years ahead. If you can take your eyes to the screen, we'll kick off our conversation.
So welcome, Christiana. Welcome back to CityTalks. I know you were here in Sydney in 2017, and since then the world has changed so much. We're looking forward to hearing from you about the changing global geopolitical landscape and what this means for global climate action. And also what we need to see in the world, what we need to see from Australia and Australia's role in this climate crisis. So how is the changing geopolitical landscape affecting the climate and nature crisis?
Well, first of all, Jennifer, lovely to be in conversation with you. Sadly virtually, because I so much enjoyed coming several years ago. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you via screen. Jennifer, I honestly don't think that anybody needs reminding of the disasters that we're seeing. We broke through the 1.5 degree temperature ceiling last year. It is not constantly broken. We have to see what is going to happen over the next 10 to 20 years, but we broke it once. The issue that scientists tell us is if it actually becomes a permanent break through those limits. But the temperature breaking is not the only one that we have seen. We have actually reached and breached 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. So we are not doing well. We are far behind in what we should be doing to reduce emissions, to protect the nature that surrounds us and that supports us, and to protect all of the other boundaries. But of course, Jennifer, I don't need to say this to anyone in Australia because you've just suffered Cyclone Alfred that hit those areas around Brisbane. And it is very clear why that very, very unusual cyclone happened, because you have a hotter ocean that is hotter than usual. You have warmer and hence wetter atmosphere because the atmosphere holds more humidity if it's warmer. And then the combination of those two made the extreme rainfall worse than it otherwise would have been. Of course, we always have to be very clear about saying cyclones are not caused by climate change, but they are made worse. They are intensified by hotter oceans and wetter atmospheres. So after the fires that you had several years ago that were devastating to Australia and painful to the rest of the world, after Cyclone Alfred, I don't need to tell you what is happening, or rather, what is not happening at the political level.
We are certainly seeing the impacts of climate here in Australia and around the world. How is Australia tracking in terms of our international obligations and in terms of our action here for climate?
We have to remember that every country counts. That is something that we really have to understand. In the global effort, every single country counts. Now, for the fact that we need to reduce emissions globally. But in addition to that, just nationally, it is quite impressive, I may say. You have in Australia the deepest rooftop solar panel penetration in the world. I'm also very interested in the fact that these solar panels could cut a household bill, by about $1,000 a year if you add a battery. So the reason why I say both of these things together, Jennifer, is because in addressing climate change, we cannot afford the luxury of arguing either only the global benefit of reducing emissions or the national, domestic, or personal benefit. We have to bring them both together. And to me, that is the beauty of addressing climate change, that it is good for the planet and it is good for those who begin to reduce emissions at home. And we know that Australia sits on so many of the necessary conditions to be able to reduce their emissions, because of the solar power that you can harvest, because you have the rare minerals, because you have the land extension, and honestly, because you have Australians who are some of the most environmentally aware people in the world. And so my question is not just congratulations, Australia, for everything you've done. Yes, that is absolutely true. But my question is, and why can't you do more? Why can't you do more? Because it is good for Australia. The more you get your own energy, the more you get energy that is higher performing and every day cheaper, the more secure you are.
Talking about Australia, but zooming back out to the global context, how are we tracking towards the Paris Agreement goals? And what do we need to achieve at the next COP?
I would say we are doing both well and terrible at the same time. We're doing terrible because the milestones that we need to reach with respect to global emission cuts year by year, especially those milestones that we measure by 2030 or net zero by 2050, we are far away from that. We are not creeping up toward having basically 45 or 50% cut emissions globally by 2030, which is what scientists have told us needs to be in place in order to protect most of life on the planet. So from that perspective, we're not doing well, and this is the critical decade. From a different perspective, however, Jennifer, I'm very impressed by what is known and recognized in the literature as the Paris effect. And that is, over the past 10 years since the adoption of the Paris Agreement, the price of solar, the price of wind, the price of EVs, the price of batteries have come down dramatically, and their use has increased dramatically. So we know that we are currently globally, we're investing almost 2 times as much into new clean energy power than we are into fossil fuel power. So better performance, more reliable, cost, not just cost parity, but more cheaper and getting cheaper. And so it's just better technology.
You've identified some lighthouses globally, lighthouses of the world, cities, nations, states, organisations who are continuing to do the most inspiring work globally to deliver action on climate and nature. Can you tell us who these lighthouses are and why their work is so critical?
You know, the wonderful part about that question is it is no longer possible to list them. We used to list them because there were few and far between, but that is no longer possible. There are so many companies, so many cities, so many states around the world, so many financial institutions that are actually following the decarbonization. Of course, you can say, are they following it fast enough? No, but they are following a decarbonization path. So the wonderful part about that question is the list is currently impossible to actually draw together. Sydney is definitely on that list because how many other cities have had the continuity of 2 decades of action on climate change, of really very enlightened self-interest to understand that this is in the best interest of Sydney? And even more importantly, the fact that the city now has the environment strategy that takes it from this year to 2030, which is the most critical year in climate action. And so Sydney can be very proud of the fact that you're top of that list.
I'm thrilled to hear you list the City of Sydney as a lighthouse around the world. This is my home city and I'm proud to see that you put it so highly on the list. But many of us are frustrated by the lack of decisive global climate action, including by our federal government here in Australia. Where do you see the new frontlines of climate action? And as a lawyer who's engaging in climate litigation, I'd particularly love to hear your views on the role of climate litigation in that fight.
Well, I am also very much of an enthusiast of climate litigation, Jennifer, because the fact is that just as we are far behind in cutting our emissions globally, we're also far behind in building the national, local, and especially the international body of jurisprudence that would protect citizens around the world. It's understandable that we're behind in that because addressing climate change is a relatively new effort for all of us. Even so, over the past 10 years since the Paris Agreement, we now have more than 2,000 climate litigation cases around the world. We have some against companies, we have some against city governments, we have some against corporations, against national governments, and we are building more and more of these cases that I'm actually very excited about. The one that I am actually very thrilled that we're going to hear from this year, and I hope very soon, is the one that has been taken by first young law students, not even lawyers, Jennifer, law students who convinced the government of Vanuatu to take the case all the way up to the International Court of Justice. I mean, I am in such admiration of young people who understand that we are playing with their present and with their future, and that they have actually said, okay, what is the most powerful lever of change that we can actually deploy here? And they're going to the system of the rule of law around the world. So that case, as you well know more than anyone else, Jennifer, we're waiting for that case to be settled this year, and that will have an incredible influence over the rest of the pieces of jurisprudence that are being settled around the world, either internationally or nationally.
I'm thrilled to hear you say that. As Council for Vanuatu, I'm proud to have represented the government that listened to the students and took up their call. But I just want to ask you one last question, because I think in the time of climate consequences, we're seeing the consequences here in Australia and around the world. Communities here are deeply affected by climate change. How do we maintain our optimism for the challenging years that are coming ahead?
So optimism as an input to a challenge is fundamental and necessary and critical to even have a chance of succeeding. It is not a guarantee. It just opens the Overton window of the possibility to be able to achieve whatever challenge. And that is so true for climate. If we just sit back now and we go, oh my God, the geopolitics is completely crazy. We are far behind in our emission reduction. Yes, the technology is fighting its course, and yes, litigation is moving forward. But if we say that is not going to be enough, and we're not going to be able to address climate change in time, then we're probably right. Because our lack of optimism will be defeatist. So that is why every morning I get up and I read the news. I know what is going on. It's not like I don't know, because optimism has to be based on a thorough understanding of the reality. And then a courageous decision to say, precisely because of that, I choose to stand up and stand in and do everything that I can, whether you're a private citizen, whether you are a city government leader, whether you're a national leader, wherever you are, whatever your area of influence is. Honestly, no one can exempt themselves anymore from doing whatever. Everybody can.
Christiana, I share your views both on optimism and the need for all of us to turn whatever skills we have to addressing this climate crisis. But thank you so much for everything that you do, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
What a fantastic conversation on perhaps an often forgotten topic, or not appropriately considered as part of our broader climate dialogue around climate litigation and the role that that will play. In her absence, can we thank Christiana for her continued outrage and optimism, and her pioneering work for that matter as well. What an incredible leader. Now, to continue the conversation, together with her significant work at the International Court of Justice, Jennifer Robinson has acted in landmark climate cases and dedicated a big part of her practice to addressing climate change and climate action. In the UK, she's played a lead role in challenging sweeping anti-protest injunctions that have been issued by corporations to shut down climate change protests. And at home, please, absolutely. And at home here in Australia, Jen is a founding board member of the Grata Fund, which is Australia's first independent public interest litigation fund. And it is supporting climate change litigation here in Australia, which is very exciting. Here in person to tell us more about the next wave of global climate action, please welcome in person, Jennifer Robinson.
Good evening, Sydney. Come on, guys, we can do it better. In honour of Auntie Joan. Good evening. Just checking you're still listening. It's so great to be here at home with you in Sydney, on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I want to start by paying my respects to Auntie Joan, to elders past, present and future, and to all First Nations people here today. Sydney is my favourite city in the world, and I'm even more proud of our city, having just heard from Christiana that Sydney is a global lighthouse when it comes to climate action. It's a shame that we can't say the same for Australia. Tonight, I'm going to tell you and explain to you how the law is being used to push for more ambitious global climate action. And I'm going to tell you more about the inspiring story that Christiana just mentioned about how a group of students in the Pacific took climate change, the world's biggest problem, to the world's highest court. Just a few months ago, I was in The Hague, before the International Court, making the case for how states' international law and human rights obligations require immediate action to drastically reduce emissions and demand far more than what states have committed at COP. But to be honest, when I started out as a human rights lawyer, I didn't think that I had any role to play in addressing climate change. It was a conversation with a friend almost 20 years ago that changed my mind, that changed the course of my career, and that led me to work on this historic case. It was Catherine, my best friend at Oxford University, who was passionate about climate change, and she wanted to know why I wasn't working on it too. I'm a human rights lawyer, not an environmental lawyer, was my answer. But she challenged me. What's the point of protecting human rights if there are no humans left to protect? And she had a point. Our conversations helped me to understand the climate crisis as a human rights crisis and the biggest threat to human rights that we all face. Dr. Catherine Wilkinson, that brilliant friend, is now the best-selling author of books on climate change, Drawdown and All We Can Save, which provide hope and practical solutions. But it's thanks to her that I took the decision to dedicate a part of my practice to climate litigation and to climate justice. And that's what led to my work in the International Court of Justice. As Christiana mentioned, the story of this case started back in 2019 with a group of law students from across the Pacific. In class at the University of the South Pacific, they discussed the impact of climate change on their home islands. Like we see here in the Torres Strait, the Pacific Islands are facing catastrophic damage. Rising sea levels mean that people are losing their homes, their lands, their fresh water sources, and their cultural heritage. Climate-induced cyclones destroy lives, livelihoods, and entire economies. And yet the Pacific's contribution to climate change is negligible and next to nothing compared to the emissions of countries like Australia, China, and the US. This is what we call climate injustice. And these students wanted to take action against it. Frustrated by the failure of COP and the failure of states to commit to the action we need to protect the Pacific and all of us, the students turned to the law. The problem is that their home governments cannot legislate at home to stop or regulate emissions in other countries, like Australia. They are beyond the jurisdiction of the Pacific Island states and indeed beyond the jurisdiction of any one state. So the students came up with an idea. What about using international law to address this problem? What about using international law to drive more ambitious global climate action? Why couldn't a government take a case to the International Court? The world's highest court has already given advisory opinions on important international issues like the legality of the use of nuclear weapons. Why not ask them to render an opinion on climate change, which should apply to all states? Now, this idea had been mooted in academic circles, and I'd considered it, but it was a very big call. For the International Court to be able to consider climate change and states' obligations, a government needed to make the request to the UN General Assembly. And not only that, a majority of UN member states, that is, a majority of all governments all over the world, had to vote in favour of it. This was a huge diplomatic effort. The students needed to find a government willing to do it and, in the process, take on superpowers and major emitters who were going to wield their influence to try to stop it. The students were told that it would be impossible. But they didn't let that stop them. They organised, they demanded action, calling on Pacific governments to take up their cause. And finally, the government of Vanuatu listened. It was in this context that I got a phone call from my colleague, Julian Arguon, a brilliant Indigenous lawyer from Guam. He was leading the case for Vanuatu. I had already acted for Vanuatu in the first case before the International Court, and they wanted me to act in this case too. So together, we drafted the legal question and prepared a strategy. 3 years later, the law is slow. International law is even slower. I sat in the General Assembly to watch the vote on our resolution. For the first time in UN history, that resolution was passed by consensus. Not one government voted against it. So little Vanuatu, a state of just 320,000 people, had pulled off what superpowers had never achieved. But for me, the most moving part of that day in New York was watching state after state address the UN and thank those students for demanding this action. Those young people and Vanuatu had created history. But there was more history making to come. Taking the world's biggest problem to the world's highest court also became the biggest case the court had ever heard. Over 100 governments and international organisations appeared in the proceedings, the highest ever participation in any case before the court. It also marked the first time that many states from the global south appeared. Never before had the World Court looked this representative of the world that it serves. Government after government stood up and presented devastating evidence about the impact of climate change on their countries, on their economies, on their people. The evidence was overwhelming and terrifying about the impact of climate change, but also who is responsible for it. The major emitting states have known since at least the 1960s that burning fossil fuels would cause climate change and the catastrophic consequences that we are seeing today. And yet, Australia and other major emitting states have continued to burn fossil fuels. We argued for Vanuatu that this violates international law and that all of these states, including Australia, have an obligation to prevent the risk of damage to our climate system. We argued that their failure to take that action to protect against that risk that they knew about then and now gives rise to an obligation to not just stop doing it, but to pay compensation to the states who were damaged by it. The overwhelming majority of states who appeared before the court supported us and supported Vanuatu in those arguments. But unfortunately, Australia was in the small group of states that were out of step with the rest of the world, along with countries like the US, Saudi Arabia, and Russia. Australia claimed that we were there to support our Pacific Island neighbours. But Australia made legal arguments that directly undermined them and our efforts to use the law to push for more ambitious global climate action. Meanwhile, back here at home, the government is doing the same in our domestic courts. Through the Grata Fund, of which I'm a founding board member and proud to be, we are supporting Torres Strait Islanders in their case against the government for its negligent failure to take action to protect them and their islands from rising sea levels. The government admits in court that climate change is causing profound harm, but it's also arguing that it doesn't have a duty to do anything about it. In other words, Australia is not acting like the lighthouse on climate that Christiana and I would like us to be, and that our Pacific Island neighbours deserve us to be. In fact, Australia's not being the lighthouse that all of us deserve. In the international court, here in our domestic courts, and outside of it. On the final day of the proceedings in The Hague, Vishal Prasad, a student from Fiji, gave the closing address to the court, and he explained that he was one of those law students who had, quote, dared to take on the impossible. They had achieved the impossible by bringing climate change before the court, and now it was time for the court to act. They had heard from states and frontline communities about the loss and damage already suffered, and how it will be far worse if we don't act now. He reminded the judges, all 15 of them, it's not too late to course correct. The court could end emission impunity and protect the human rights of current and future generations. Vishal called out countries which are still, and I quote him, shamefully content to pour billions into a dying fossil fuel industry, an industry that continues to pump out planet-killing emissions. And guess what? Australia is one of those countries. Our government has given $14.5 billion in subsidies to the fossil fuel industry in this financial year alone. Shame. Guys, it'll be worse under a Liberal government, so vote for the climate. Vishal explained to the court how the great majority of the world's governments consider that this conduct is not just shameful, but unlawful, and asked the court to call it unlawful. We are now waiting for the court's opinion, which could come at any time. Christiana, you heard it from her, experts say it could shape international, regional, and domestic climate litigation for decades to come, and drive more ambitious global climate action. It is predicted to be the most consequential decision in the court's history. I share Christiana's hope and optimism about what it could mean for global climate action, and I am so proud to have been a part of it. But at this time, when geopolitics are more uncertain than ever, with the US backing out of UN climate commitments, and Australia under a Liberal government will do the same, the law is more important than ever, as is this court decision. And it all started with 27 students in a classroom in Vanuatu. So just imagine, what could we achieve if we all shared their ambition? I believe in the power of the law, but it is far too slow for this crisis. We need more immediate political action from Australia and from all states, and that requires all of us. I hope this story inspires each of you as it inspires me about what's possible when we each commit the skills we have and we work together to address this climate crisis. Imagine what we could achieve if all of us got in and gave it a go, using whatever skills and resources we have. I'm certain that we could make Australia the global lighthouse that it should be, and that we and all of us and our children deserve. And in the meantime, Tonight, you can do two simple things towards that goal. First, please follow and support the work of the Pacific Island students fighting climate change and follow updates from them about the International Court decision and their ongoing campaigning and advocacy. And second, please donate to the Grata Fund. Help us fund more climate litigation here at home in Australia to force our government to do better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jennifer Robinson, everyone. Phenomenal work. Continuing the theme of the earlier conversation of equal parts outrage and optimism, giving us reasons to be outraged in whether we're talking about funding, whether we're talking about arguments our government are making in domestic courts or in international ones. But importantly, this incredible reason for optimism, the story of those students that come from a country of 321,000 people, the size of which Sydney in and of itself's population would dwarf, and what they have been able to do and the way they have taken that to the world's highest court is truly inspiring and should remind all of us that this is absolutely within our control and our influence and our ability to organise and make a significant difference and impact. The other thing that's really striking me is a theme that's emerging tonight. Clover shared the letter from the 11-year-old in her electorate. Jennifer talking about young students. Damon opened with this idea of storytelling. Perhaps there's this piece where we need to all be more consciously listening to the stories of those under the age of 25 and what they are screaming at us about with great urgency around how we need to act for their future. So that importance of young voices who seem to perhaps have a greater sense of grasp and understanding of this than is reaching some corridors of power. With that, we're going to continue our conversation. Matt Keane is going to join us in just a moment to talk about what this means in an Australian context from his lens as the chair of the Climate Change Authority. He was appointed to that role on the 5th of August last year for a term of 5 years. Many of you might know him for his former role where he was the member for Hornsby here in New South Wales from 2011 up until right before he took his new role in August in 2024. As Treasurer and Energy Minister here in New South Wales, he championed climate action that is in the best interest of households and businesses. And in 2020, he delivered the Electricity Infrastructure Roadmap, which outlined a 20-year plan for New South Wales energy infrastructure. The roadmap spurs private investment into renewable energy while reducing emissions and power bills for the people of New South Wales. To talk to us about why strong and decisive action by Australia is urgent, can you please welcome Matt Keane?
Well, thank you, Holly, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Could I too join Auntie Joan in acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered on tonight, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd like to join others in paying my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Can I thank the City of Sydney for the opportunity to participate in this event alongside such a distinguished group of guest speakers. And I just want to acknowledge the speaker before me for the incredible leadership that she's displayed and making a real impact, not just domestically, but globally. Thank you so much for your amazing leadership. Could I acknowledge the City of Sydney councillors in the room here tonight for your continued leadership of this great city. And some of my former colleagues in the State Parliament. I know Jenny Leong, the member for Newtown, is here, and I acknowledge the work that you continue to do for the community here in the city. But I would like to take a moment to acknowledge one of the most important giants of Australian politics, and that's the Lord Mayor, Clover Moore. Clover has long been a dogged and unwavering voice, speaking out on so many important causes. But I want to acknowledge the important role and voice she's provided in standing up for our planet. She's been a staunch advocate for the environmental and economic benefits of acting on climate change. and provided real leadership through the daily work that the city does to secure a sustainable future. And I think we've seen that here tonight with their environmental plan. Put simply, Clover Moore is a colossus in Australian politics. I think that she thoroughly deserves the Herald's recent description of her as one of Australia's most formidable and impactful political leaders, and I want to thank her and acknowledge her for her continued leadership. Now, ladies and gentlemen, confronting climate change can enhance our prosperity, our environment, and our way of life all at once. It's a 3-for-1 deal that we would be mad to pass up. But we need to act with haste to seize it. 2024 was the hottest year on record. It claimed that unwanted title from, you guessed it, 2023. The World Meteorological Organization also estimated that global emissions hit a record of their own in 2024 and are yet to peak. These trends have manifested in an escalating cycle of extreme weather disasters, horrific wildfires in California, unprecedented floods and bushfires and droughts here at home. Supposedly 1 in 100-year events now occurring with relentless regularity. And each time, the bill for recovery and rebuilding reinforces the cost of waiting to act on climate change. And let me tell you, for those people that say it's too costly to take action on climate change, I was the New South Wales Treasurer who had to fund the most expensive natural weather event in the Lismore floods, which followed the most expensive bushfires that we'd seen in New South Wales history, which followed the worst drought that we've seen in the state's history. So again, not taking action on climate change is dwarfs the fact that not taking action on climate change will leave us with a huge bill. Now, I get it that some days it can be hard to hang on to hope when the difficult climate news pings up on our screens increasingly often. But I'm upbeat about Australia's capacity to contribute meaningfully to global efforts to reduce emissions. And I'm optimistic that actions like ours, pursued by like-minded partners around the world, can bend the curve and start bringing emissions down rapidly. That's because I see the progress that we've already made and the potential to turbocharge our efforts. And let me just start with the electricity system. Data from Australia's energy market operator shows that in the fourth quarter of 2024, renewables provided on average 46% of the power in our main national grid, rising to 70% at some times. That has helped slash the emissions intensity of electricity, a crucial task given the sector accounts for approximately 1/3 of our national emissions. Over 4 million homes now have rooftop solar, and the number is growing every single day. And we're putting in place the infrastructure to store this abundant clean energy too, so it can keep powering our lives and economy long after the sun goes down. Bloomberg has recently estimated that Australia will quadruple the size of our large-scale battery fleet in the next 3 years alone. The charge of the Light Brigade 2.0, you might call it. This overhaul is what will allow us to move past a dependence on clunky, old, and unreliable coal-fired power stations. And let me be very clear. People who are arguing for nuclear in the Australian system are providing a Trojan horse for the coal industry. Another reason to accelerate delivery of a clean power grid is that this is an essential first step in decarbonising the rest of our economy. Abundant clean electricity makes so much more possible across sectors like industry, transport, and our built environment, and much more. It's been one of the great insights of the Lord Mayor of the City of Sydney, and what I saw during my own time in New South Wales government, that this great global city of ours can serve as a platform for change, not in 20 years' time, right now. In reimagining the places that we live, work, and play, we can both reduce our emissions and make cities more resilient in the face of climate change that's already baked in. When the Climate Change Authority recently released its Sector Pathways Review, we called out the sheer scale of the opportunity that comes from addressing emissions in the built environment around us. There are more than 11 million homes and 1 million commercial properties across Australia. They account for around 70% of Australia's total emissions. They are all exposed to the destructive whims of extreme weather, but they can also serve as a catalyst for change. Energy performance requirements, energy efficiency programs, and construction codes that keep raising the bar are essential elements for progress. We need to ensure that those standards and codes are well designed and easy to apply, because the smarter we are at designing our cities, buildings, and infrastructure, the more we can pursue several objectives at once. We can advance design and engineering solutions that produce more energy efficient buildings, for example, to lower their carbon footprint. And at the same time, we can deliver buildings and cities that are more livable, more affordable, and more resilient to severe heat and floods. As we pursue these goals of creating better cities, where walking and public transport are the norm, where we embed circular economy principles as a matter of practice, and where we invest in the next generation of technological solutions to lower our emissions, we also plant the seeds of our future prosperity. As a global financial hub, Sydney understands that the trends in international capital markets are undeniable. Global energy investment last year was more than $4.5 trillion, with 2/3 of that going to renewable energy and related infrastructure. Of new energy sources added in 2024, 92% were renewables, the International Renewable Agency reported recently. So capital is now surging into low and zero emissions industries and technologies, igniting healthy competition among nations to create the most compelling environments for investment. The real question is now, which countries will take the prize? It's a race that I believe Australia should and can win. We have the skilled and innovative people, a cherished reputation as a stable place to invest, and a proud history as a trading nation. So let's harness our competitive advantage, funnel that tsunami of capital into our country, and jumpstart work on the breakthroughs needed to lower emissions here at home. And in turn, we can export the technological solutions and fuel sources that the rest of the world needs to decarbonise, setting Australia up for the next era of our national prosperity. I'm supremely confident that when we blend national action in combating climate change with the local inspiration evident in places like the City of Sydney, nothing can hold us back. And in doing so, we can grab a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-generations opportunity to ensure that we hand our planet to future generations better than they found it. But in doing so, handing our economy to those generations more prosperous than any generation before them has ever dreamed was imaginable. That's the chance. We can seize it if we do it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Matt Keane. That very important message that we cannot, it's too costly, we cannot afford not to fund climate change action. From the person who was in charge of the New South Wales economy, you couldn't have heard that from someone who is more across the issue and the realities of how this is impacting this state and equally, by extension, our communities and our nation. We've now got a phenomenal panel of people that are working deeply in this space from a range of perspectives. I'm going to welcome them up onto stage one by one, and then we'll get straight into a conversation. Thank you to all of you who submitted very thoughtful questions that we will interject into the panel dialogue. So joining me first for the discussion on the climate and nature crisis, what Australia does matters, is Clarence Stockey, the director at GWA, and might recognise him as a presenter on Gardening Australia. Yes, there's strong fans down the front. Welcome, Clarence. Joining us next is Richie Merzian, the CEO of Clean Energy Investment Group, also the former inaugural Climate and Energy Director at the Australian Institute and a government rep to the UN Climate Conference. Welcome, Richie. Next up, Professor Emerita Leslie Hughes, the Pro-Chancellor of Macquarie University and also the Professor Emerita in Biology at Macquarie University. Welcome, Leslie. And someone who will no doubt be very familiar to the Sydney Cider audience here tonight, Eamon Waterford, the CEO for Committee for Sydney. Can you please make him feel welcome? Right.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we've got lots to discuss, and as always with these sorts of conversations, not enough time. So we're going to jump in as best we can. And Leslie, I've had the good fortune in the lead up to this conversation of spending time talking with all of these esteemed folks here on stage with me. And Leslie, I want to start with you because something that you said really struck me the other day. You said we have seen climate change and its impacts accelerating much faster than the models predicted, in a way that almost climate scientists are struggling to explain. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, it seems clear from that the risk and the speed were underestimated. What is it going to take to get Australia on a war footing when it comes to this topic? What do we need to do?
Unfortunately, we probably need a few more really catastrophic events to really focus everybody's minds. I think it's a natural human condition. You know, I think when we had the Black Summer bushfires, everybody was talking about climate change, and then after those, people stopped talking about it. But I think we've got to remember, as Christiana said, we may well have already breached the 1.5. On the current rate of emissions, we will get to 2 degrees in 20 years. And if that current rate continues, we will get to 3 degrees by the end of this century. So I won't be alive then, my kids won't be alive then, but if I have grandkids, they will be. So I think we really have to, as a lot of our speakers, especially Damon and others have said tonight, think about our children's future. And that hopefully is the argument that will carry the day.
Absolutely. Richie, swimming to another part of context, it's sort of hard to have a conversation about climate at the moment without acknowledging the Trump administration. And without acknowledging sort of the dramatic departure, pulling out of Paris and the like. Let's take the glass half full in terms of the opportunities that you think could emerge for Australia in the renewable energy landscape by virtue of sort of the change in the US administration's view.
Yep, and it's amazing as well. It's the first time we've mentioned Trump tonight.
We've been very behaved, really.
Thankfully. But taking a glass half full, under the previous administration, there was a huge investment in climate and renewables. And so with the withdrawal or the scaling back, what you're seeing is what was a vacuum cleaner for bringing in investment into clean energy is now looking for a new home. And so if we think about this solely in the context of Australia, we're highly reliant on foreign investment for our renewables. Over 70% of our solar, wind, hydro batteries are built thanks to foreign investment. And so for us, there's an opportunity to attract that investment here. If we're going to be hitting 82% renewables by the end of the decade, then we need to have the targets, the settings right so we can attract that here. And there's a lot of capital looking to back in a net zero economy, so that could be Australia's opportunity.
It's exciting to think there might be some silver linings.
Silver linings.
Eamon, I want to come to you on Sydney. I mean, Matt mentioned there the growing bill that's coming, and you're someone who speaks a lot and who is at the Committee for Sydney doing work around the increasing threat Sydney faces from climate-induced natural disasters, floods, fires, heat waves, the types of topics we've heard spoken about tonight. What do you see as the immediate steps that are needed to be taken in order to build climate resilience here in the city?
Yeah, so let's start with the problem. So it is coming, but it's obviously already here. We had 12 natural disasters between 2020 and 2024, about 3 a year in Sydney, Metro Sydney. that's bushfires, that's storms, that's floods. Each of those costs about $3 billion to clean up and to deal with the damage from that. So that's $36 billion there. And that'll happen this year. And we even saw today with the storm surges impacting on Bondi icebergs, but also on, there are 13 houses on the street and the waterfront at Dolls Point, and 12 of them flooded last night. Dolls Point is 9 kilometres away from the coastline across Botany Bay. It is not the place you think of being at the forefront of climate change-induced natural disaster, but 12 out of 13 of the homes on that waterfront got flooded last night, and the people who lived there said, we've had floods before, but nothing ever this bad. So it's already here, right? Like a lot of the impacts that we're talking about are actually being felt already. Going forward, how do they get worse? Well, the place is going to get hotter. It's going to rain more. It's going to get hotter. We're going to see more natural disasters. It's going to be more costly. Every single person in this room, I'm sure you came to a City Talk on climate change. You all are broadly supportive of action on climate change, but it's important that you also understand that it's going to affect you personally. This isn't an abstract concept. It's probably already directly affecting you. What do we need to do? Well, Sydney needs to adapt. We need to do our bit of the mitigation. We need to decarbonise the city. There is so much work that Sydney has to do, but we also need to start adapting to those consequences, thinking differently about the way we treat our shores and our waterfronts, thinking differently about the way we plan for the houses that already sit in floodplains, making sure we don't build any more homes into floodplains, plan for extreme heat. 1 in 5 days in places like Penrith and Windsor are going to be over 35 degrees. 1 in every 5 days will be over 35 degrees in bits of Western Sydney by by the end of the century, basically. This is going to be dramatic, and we cannot live good lives in this city if we don't start to adapt the way that we live to solve for that.
Absolutely. I want to come to you, Clarence, on the cultural context, and I also want to weave in an audience question, because I wanted to ask you about why it's essential to integrate cultural practices to urban planning. We also had an audience question come in saying, what does caring for country look like in a dense urban environment? How does that work effectively?
Well, it didn't work for us in a legal sense because it looked like no one lived here. We were that good at looking after the country. Terra nullius is a legal fiction, however, but anyway, we'll get to that some point. Look, I think caring for country is in the design world these days, they talk about biophilic design, biophilia being the innate connection that we all have to nature. But sadly, so many of us are so disconnected that it's become somebody else's problem, or I want all these things that make life so easy, but I don't really think about where they're coming from or what impact they're having. So for First Nations people globally, I think it's been that methodology of environmental management that has seen us through and continues through the resilience of First Nations people in a modern world to try and hold on to traditional ways of thinking and ways of being. And we are all able to benefit from those ways of thinking and being in reconnecting to nature, because the more we connect with nature, the more we are affiliated with nature, we will feel those effects of climate change and we will do something about them. Until then, it just is a obscure sort of idea. And I think to Leslie's point, if we have these big storm events, these big fires, then people actually sit and they think about it really intently for a bit, and then it just sort of drifts away. But we need to be thinking about it all the time, and not being negative, but think, what can we do to make a much more positive outcome for all of us?
I want to come to the panel on the challenges we have to overcome, and you've each got such different takes on these, so please jump in and add to one another as we go, but I will jump around a little bit because we've got so much territory to cover, and equally we've had our audience raise a number of challenges they would be interested in your opinions on. Richard, you first on the cost of living though. How do we reframe climate action as a solution to the cost of living crisis? I mean, Matt talked about this challenge that we perceive it as too costly. I've had a number of questions come through from the audience around, how do we connect this idea of the risk to prosperity?
We're quite one of the benefits of dealing with climate now versus, say, 20 years ago is that the economics are on our side. This is, I think, a reason why, jumping back to President Trump, to mention it twice now, the US pulled out of the Paris Agreement and no one followed. Like, it had universal adoption, the Paris Agreement, and we all knew the US would pull out. It's the second time they've done it, the third time they pull out of a climate agreement, and no one followed because the economics, the fundamentals back the clean energy revolution. We heard from Matt, 92% of the investment into energy went into renewables, according to the IEA. Because the cheapest power you can build is solar and wind with clean energy storage to back it up as well. And so if you just take renewables out of the system, and we did a little bit of a counterfactual, if you take renewables out of the Australian grid last year, that's both utility, large scale and rooftop, then people would be paying up to $417 more in their power bills. Renewables are putting downward pressure on power prices. So that's the first thing to remember, because there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of conversation around the role of renewables. It's putting downward pressure. The reason why power prices are going up is because we're still majority reliant on fossil fuels, on aging, unreliable coal-fired power stations that break down regularly, and on expensive gas. Australia pays international prices for local gas, and when international prices go up, so do our gas prices, and therefore we all end up paying more. The more renewables we get on the grid, the cheaper it will be. And the best part about renewables is all the cost comes from the build. Once you build it, that marginal cost is pretty much free. So if we can lower the capital cost of renewables, and the government has a number of ways to do that, where there's more we can do. We need to build more transmission, we need to reform the market, we need to fast-track renewable build-out whilst at the same time maintaining nature as well. You can do both. Then we can bring those prices down, and then we need to electrify everything. It's cheaper to run your home purely off electricity with heat pumps, with an EV that you can use rather than filling up on petrol or diesel. And it's the same thing with industry as well.
I want to come, Leslie, to you on gas in a moment, but Eamon, I want to come drill it down a little bit on affordability on the housing piece, because it's come through really strongly in the questions, specifically on something that's been a topic of a lot of the political conversation, election dialogue, the housing crisis. People have asked, how do you address it while ensuring these new developments are well located, resilient and sustainable? How do we tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, that is like hard, but not impossible. And actually, there's a really great answer, so don't worry. I mean, to this point that Richie has made around cost of living, like if you think about what are the big cost of living challenges facing people, it's housing, it's energy, it's petrol, it's insurance, it's food. Pretty much all of these have a climate change lens to them, right? And I think action on climate change can positively affect the cost of all of these things. So there's a conceptual shift we need people to do, which is to understand that taking action doesn't add cost, it reduces costs. It might not be as directly obvious, but it helps. So the big point to make is it's really cheap to build houses in places that are really climate exposed. So on the face of it, it would seem like the way to bring down house prices is to build houses in places that flood, that are too hot, a long way away from services, that are not well connected, that you have to drive everywhere and pump out emissions from a petrol car. But that is only looking at the upfront costs. The lifetime costs for the person that has to live in that house are much, much higher. And in fact, when you take transport costs plus housing costs, and we look at where the most expensive parts of the city are, they're not actually in the inner city. The proportion that people spend of their annual or their weekly income on housing plus transport is highest in places like Campbelltown and Liverpool, because they have to travel so far to get to their job and to drop the kids off and these sorts of things. And we know that they're paying more in their electricity bills to cool their houses because they're living in places that were not well designed for the climate and are really, really hot. So I guess I would say, look, it looks on the face of it, if you take a really blunt review of housing, to make places that are climate resilient costs more, but it doesn't if you take the lifetime costs of these places. The answer is building dense, resilient communities in places that we know are cool, that are well connected, where people can use public transport, where there's lots and lots of trees, good access to water, all these sorts of things. Good news is there's heaps of places like that in Sydney.
Excellent. I want to come, Leslie, to something else Richie led us into, which is the gas conversation. You have declared we need to break up with gas as a nation. Can you talk to us a little bit about the case for breaking up with gas and equally what it would take from a policy standpoint to accelerate that?
Well, in the last couple of years, I've got really passionate about a gas called methane. And I don't know when it was and I don't know who did it, but some decades ago there was a really smart, clever marketing person who decided that we needed to rebrand methane. And what did they come up with? Natural gas. Sounds natural, sounds great. It's methane. Methane's the second most important greenhouse gas. It's probably responsible for about a third of the warming that the globe has seen thus far. If I released a molecule of methane right now and a molecule of CO2, the molecule of methane is 120 times better at trapping heat than the molecule of CO2.
Wow.
Even after 100 years, any methane that's left from this moment will be still 25 or 26 times as good, or better, sorry, than every molecule of CO2. Methane is a terrible, terrible gas, and we need to leave it safely locked up in the Earth's crust, just like oil and just like coal. So let's stop calling it... Let's stop pretending it's natural. So we have to get our households off gas, our manufacturing off gas, our transport off gas, and we can do it. There are alternatives. We need to, as Richie said just then, we need to electrify everything and drive that electricity with renewables. We have the technology. There's nothing magic about it. Even if you have a gas stove, which, by the way, every time you light a gas stove, if you can smell the gas, you're releasing methane into the atmosphere and you're creating a terrible environment for your kids to breathe. Get an induction cooktop, stick it on top. You can get portable ones. We can all get off gas, and we need to do it as soon as possible. And I'm really pleased to see the Victorian government, for example, has banned new gas connections in new homes. We just heard from Clover about the City of Sydney's work in that sense. I'm really disappointed that the New South Wales government, frankly, has been completely piss weak on this and has refused to do it. Thank you. And they'll only do it if we pressure them. So start pressuring. We need to get off gas.
All right, we've got something for the to-do list. Richie, I know methane's a favourite topic of yours. So I'm going to give you a chance to add on there, but I'd also love your view, kind of scaling that up around the most upvoted question of the night, which is around fossil fuel subsidies. And just this piece around, not just the individual action, but speaking of that government piece, how can we stop them is the specific question that's been put, and I think you're well placed to have a go at that.
Yeah. We have this weird tendency in Australia to subsidise the things that we don't want and then tax the things that we do, and we need to flip it around. And so the 14...
Sounds so simple when you put it like that.
Yeah, subsidise the things you want. The 14 billion that we heard mentioned from Jennifer in terms of subsidies for fossil fuels, I think most of that goes to the diesel fuel rebate. And so that's really subsidising the use of petrol and diesel that's used off-road. And if you look at the quantum of what that subsidy looks like, it's more than the Australian government usually spends annually on the Australian Army. That's how big that problem is. Now imagine if we use that money elsewhere. The whole issue with gas in particular is that Australia is one of the largest exporters of natural gas in the world. So most of our gas actually goes offshore. And if we really had a gas shortage here, then we can look at what we do with that export rather than really looking for new resources. The opportunity is that we can switch all the technologies that exist to get us off gas. Some of them are more sort of at the pilot stage, others are ready to commercialize as well. The largest user of natural gas or methane in Australia is the gas industry. It uses gas to actually liquefy the gas for export. So most of the technologies we can actually make that switch with. And the best part is when we do that, we bring down power prices. When we do that, we bring down the cost in industry as well. And so if we went and subsidized the things we wanted and taxed the things that we didn't, we'd make a lot more money. And the other part to that is that the gas industry also doesn't pay much by way of tax as well. And if you look at Australia's massive gas exports, it exports about the same amount of liquefied natural gas as Qatar. Qatar makes about 26 billion from its taxation. Australia makes $1 billion from the petroleum resources rent tax.
Wow. Extraordinary. Clarence, Richie there has taken us into the incentives and subsidies discussion, and something you and I have spoken about is that, you know, when you look at it at a local level, you're watching developers who can simply pay fines for removing trees and habitats, and I'm interested to get your view on how we need to think about encouraging people to do the right thing and what you're observing in your work.
Where do I start? I plant hundreds of plants every year just in my day-to-day work, but also for fun because I love gardening. Funny that. But plants and nature is not valued for the work it does for us. It's not factored into the profit and loss statements of companies. When swamplands clean water, produce oxygen, do what they do in stormwater runoff, it doesn't get paid. Nature doesn't get paid. There's no levy, there's no cultural levy, there's no environmental levy. Governments have tried, but there are powers at work that seem to donate money to political parties to do otherwise, apparently, allegedly, in case anyone's listening into this conversation. But look, I see it in the work that I do with a lot of new developments in particular, where you can take out a swathe of trees as long as you plant them somewhere else. And it's difficult when you know that eucalypts only form hollows after they turn 50, 60 years old. So you take out a 100-year-old eucalypt and replace it with a 10-year-old eucalypt, it's not the same thing. And it's never going to be the same thing for another 90 years or another 45, 50 years. So, having legislation in place that penalises people for taking out ecologies, which is only a very small fraction of what the profit margin is no disincentive for damaging nature. So it's very difficult from an economic perspective to really crack the whip, as it were, I suppose. But the incentive, thankfully, for a lot of our kids and the younger generation, they are seeing the value of nature and they are understanding that value. It's very difficult to have political parties who don't value nature and don't understand what the impacts are going to be, particularly around ecosystems. We are not going to see the damage that we've caused now for another 20, 30, 50 years. Just those tiny little links in those systems that we don't know about, the bacteria, the mycelial networks, microbes, all of those things that don't exist and can't exist without those interdependent relationships. We won't see that damage for years to come. We can see it when the trees are gone, we can see it when, but we won't know exactly what's happening until it's too late. So we can act now and we can make it change.
Eamon, jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Like, we do not value nature for all of its intrinsic and extrinsic benefits that it provides to all of us. Like, we all know inherently places that are green, places that are natural are places we love. There's something emotional that we feel very strongly about, and that's whether that's country or whether that's, feeling in a space where we feel safe. There's something very valuable there. It's good for our mental health. We know it's great for our physical health, having nature in our communities. It's good for air quality. One of actually Sydney's sort of secret things that it's really good at, and why we weirdly score very well on climate measures globally when we probably don't deserve to, is because our air quality is very good, and that's because of trees primarily. It's obviously, nature is very good for our climate resilience. Spoiler alert, if we want to protect those coastal regions, it's not going to be by building big concrete bollards, it's going to be by bringing mangroves back, or thinking differently about oysters and how natural systems are going to protect us, because they have been doing for a very long time. And it has economic value that, if you go and value it, you can see. It's just that we often don't. But, we've done research that suggests that actually we stole this research, we didn't do it, but if you increase the tree canopy in an area by about 10%, you increase the property values by about $50,000 of the people that live there. So there's values on almost any sort of scale you choose to pick, as long as you go looking for it. And I just don't think we look for it enough.
Absolutely. So we're getting kind of now into, I think, solutions and momentum building ideas, and I want to move us there in the time that we have remaining. Clarence, Eamon's touched on something there around the mangroves, and something that's a real passion for you is actually something all of us have within our control, which is how we shift our perspective on what might be termed a messy ecosystem. Can you explain why you think this is such a game-changing idea?
Well, you just have, no offence to the City of Sydney, but you just have to walk around urban areas and just see how everything has to be neat and tidy, pruned to within an inch of its life. No leaf litter, no sticks, nothing for the invertebrates, nothing for the reptiles. It makes no sense. Nature is not like that. And it's the same when I grew up on a farm and seeing fruit and vegetables with the tiniest blemish. It can't go to market because people have it in their head that it has to look perfect. It has to be the supermodel of the vegetable world before I eat it. So it's very strange. And when I did a lot of work with the slow food movement, it's the same thing. We have systems in place where we grow mangoes in Darwin, freight them to Adelaide markets. They go to different parts of the country, but some of them go back to Darwin to go on the shelf. It makes no sense, and it's impacting climate. It's impacting all of the systems that we can grow most of our own food in our own homes. If you have a backyard, you don't need lawn. Lawn is the worst monoculture ever. If you're not using it, don't use it. Grow some food. Grow some native plants.
Excellent. We're building a to-do list for you all tonight, if you haven't noticed. We've already been given a couple of bits of homework from Leslie and from Clarence there. Richie, we've bid for COP. COP26 potentially could be here down under. Why does it matter, and what could hosting COP do for climate action in this country?
It's a solid question, and it's wonderful to see Christiana up on the screen. Hopefully the COP brings her here. I had a very small role, as did thousands of other negotiators, to feed into what became the Paris Agreement, which Christiana, as the head of the UN climate body, really shepherded through, which was amazing because it brought every country together to agree by consensus every word of a document that was then rapidly adopted and is now setting the norms around what is 1.5 degrees, why we need to move to net zero, why we're rapidly scaling up renewables. The UN climate system is slow. It's incremental. Decisions are made by consensus amongst every country in the world, so one country can block decision making. So it makes it a really difficult place to get progress. So when you look at the Paris Agreement, you compare it to our own legislative body, which only requires 51% to get anything done. I think that's the whole world by consensus, and we kind of even agree on whether we go nuclear or renewables. It is an achievement, but it's slow. Having said that, as the host, you bring the entire world to your doorstep. And they don't just judge you on whether you do right according to the rules of the UN, they judge you on your moral climate leadership. Now, for the 30-year history of the UNFCCC, Australia's never put its hand up to host, until now. And not only does it want to host, it wants the additional accountability of hosting in partnership with the Pacific. And the Pacific have obviously been a champion for what needs doing, where the number one threat there isn't, the economic welfare of the state, it's climate change. And so Australia wants to host the UN Climate Conference, to bring the whole world here, to do it in partnership with the Pacific. And I think if they do that, it'll be a huge moment like one we've never had before, to actually get the Australian government once and for all to very clearly pick which direction it's going to go in. And that's why I think tonight's been awesome. It's sort of filled my cup of hope and optimism, and hopefully the idea of hosting a COP just adds that one little bit extra.
Absolutely, it feels like a real momentum builder, yeah. for what Jennifer was talking about earlier in terms of the beacon on the hill and what Australia could be in terms of its global leadership. And speaking of, Leslie, we've touched on this a number of times, so I'd love for you to come at it quite directly if you can. This cognitive dissonance that it feels like exists between promoting renewables and this continued fossil fuel subsidy piece. So from a solution, a policy mechanism standpoint, what would your hope be for the government that comes into office later this year, whoever that may be?
Well, we have got this election, and I think if people go away from this hall tonight thinking, well, what can I do? Well, if you're over 18, you can vote, and that is a very precious and powerful thing. I can't sit here and tell you who to vote for. I'm not allowed to because of the Charities Act, because I work for the Climate Council, but I can tell you to look at the candidates in your electorate, find out what their climate policies are, if indeed they have any, and shape your vote accordingly. And if we all go away and vote for nature and vote for climate, because they're usually twinned, then we move forward. And, I certainly have a view about what sort of shape of government I would like to see. I think most people in this room can probably guess what that might be. But if we do have a far more friendly climate government in the future, it's not that this government hasn't done some good things. They have. The renewable energy target is very strong, and they've got some really good policies in place, but they're still extending and developing fossil fuel reserves, and that just has to stop. So,
you did very well to navigate that so directly and diplomatically at the same time. That was beautiful to behold. Eamon, I want to come to you on a Sydney-specific lens. You're a passionate believer Sydney can be doing more to decarbonise itself and be less reliant on the regional areas. Where's your focus at in terms of the things that you believe, one or two things that can make a real material difference and that Sydney scientists should go out and be more conscious of in the way that they're thinking about their companies, their organisations, their communities?
Yeah, so one thing that Sydney has in spades is rooftop solar. 30% of the homes in this city have rooftop solar on top of them, and a very large proportion of the commercial and industrial buildings in the city have got that as well. And that is actually rare. We're a world leader when it comes to rooftop solar. We kind of did it by accident and nobody noticed, but we're really, really good at it, it turns out. And we can turn that into essentially a virtual power plant, a renewable energy zone, an urban renewable energy zone, with the implementation of batteries that basically store the power that's collected during the day to be used in the evenings. So you can do a battery in your house. They're not super efficient. Less than 1% of those people that have solar have a battery. Cost a lot. Probably where we're going to end up with is community scale batteries as kind of the unlocking piece of infrastructure that enables these virtual networks that basically enable us to be doing some of the heavy lifting for ourselves rather than just relying on regional areas to do all the renewables investment. So that's something we're very excited about. There are regulatory barriers, there are legal barriers. Definitely we need you to go out there and think about those, but I don't know, if there are lawyers and regulators in the room, please think about it deeply. Otherwise, yeah, there is a couple. But, that's where we're at, I suppose, is thinking of that's a really great and exciting opportunity for Sydney specifically because of how much rooftop solar we have.
Now, our panel time, unfortunately, has drawn to a close. We've packed a lot into a very short period of time, but I do want to focus us, Eamon, a little bit to your point there around what can everyone leave this room, go think about. We've spoken a lot tonight around what Australia does matters. We've been reminded numerous times over by our speakers of the responsibility our individual actions in scaling up to that collective impact have. So Eamon, I might start with you and work our way down our panel. What is one thing you would love for people to leave this City Talk and go away and do?
Yeah. One of the fatal flaws of climate change, or the original sins, is that it takes a really long time. It's a very slow consequence, and so you don't notice when it happens because it happens so incrementally and inexorably. But we are past the point where climate change is something that's going to happen, as in future tense. It is the consequences of climate change for Sydney are happening now, and in fact started happening a while ago. So the thing I want you all to take away is to stop using the future tense when you talk about climate change in Sydney and the consequences, the negative consequences of climate change, and start talking in the past tense and the present tense, because that's what's happening right now.
change that part of our story. Great, Leslie?
What I just said. Next election, the election after that, the election after that, we get the politicians, not only that we deserve, but that we vote for. So vote for the climate.
Put the climate on your ballot. Richie?
Our major challenges now are not that we need to finance the change. The finance is there. It's not that we need to develop the technology. It's also around and it works. It's that we need the policies and programs in place, and that comes from us pushing for them. And that comes from us using our voice. And we heard how powerful it is using our voice here. You don't need to be an expert or a scientist or a gardener. You can use your voice straight away. So please use it.
Use it. Clarence, bring us home.
Well, the last time I voted, I was bitterly disappointed. But hopefully, yeah, look, I don't have the opportunity for insider knowledge when it comes to investing, but I think we can all do our bit by investing in renewables, thinking about what our actions do on our very small scale. Plant more trees, plant more greenery. Plants can save us. Plants equals life was the old Botanic Gardens credo before the marketers got involved, but it is true. We rely on plants for oxygen, for food, for medicine, for everything. Nature is out there working for us for free all the time, but we just do not give her the credit she deserves, and we are just doing our utmost to, we're our own worst enemy, sadly. So, the climate action is needed now, and what we do now will impact our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. We need to leave them something way better than what we've got now.
Well, great practical suggestions to finish on. Can you join me in thanking my panel, Eamon, Leslie, Richie and Clarence so much. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Well, with that, we have one more high-octane component of our evening to come. We have 3 groundbreaking leaders who are going to take to the stage to demonstrate climate action that is happening right now through collaborations and partnerships here in the City of Sydney. Here's the catch, though. They only have 3 minutes to do it. And you and me, we're going to keep them on track with their time. You're going to watch the big clock count down. I'm going to give them a thunderous applause when it gets to 0 and play them off the stage, right? In the best way possible. So allow me to introduce them one by one. Before we do that, it's a little nerve-wracking. Can we give them a round of applause? Yeah. Give them confidence. All right. Let's do it. To kick us off, Emma Bacon from the Greater Sydney Heat Smart City Plan. She's the Executive Director there and at Sweltering Cities, and she's also a member of the Greater Sydney Heat Smart Task Force. Take it away, Emma.
You might have heard that heat waves are our deadliest environmental disaster. They kill more people than fires, floods, and storms combined, but I don't think I need to tell the people in this room that they are projected to get longer, hotter, and deadlier. But heat isn't just a question of our health and our bodies. It also impacts lots of the different systems and sectors that we interact with every day. From our built environment to our natural environment to our transport system, our energy system, even our schools. So if we're going to think about making our entire city heat resilient, we need to make sure that people who work in all of those different sectors are at the table. And that's exactly what the Greater Sydney Heat Task Force has done. Led by the incredible teams at the Western Sydney Regional Organisation of Councils and Resilient Sydney, they brought together 23 task force members, dozens of organisations, hundreds of individuals to ask the really big questions of how do we make Sydney a heat-safe city. The outcome of that is the Heat Smart City Plan, driven by the vision at the centre to say that people living in Greater Sydney can survive and thrive in a warmer climate and during extreme heat events. Through my organisation, Sweltering Cities, I work across the country, talking to people and organisations about what the impact of heat is and the best solutions. And I can tell you hands down, this is the most ambitious and tangible bit of heat adaptation and resilience policy work happening anywhere in the country. There are 5 key directions underpinned by world-class research. And there's all these recommendations that are really fantastic, but I'm just going to mention a couple that really mattered to me. No, I'm going to list all of them for you. Recommendations like the fact that we need to fix our rules for renters to make sure everyone is safe during a heat wave. We're going to analyse all the different ways heat impacts our economies. We're going to look at heat-safe movement, what insurance can do. We're going to look at our OH&S laws to make sure that everyone gets home safe after a hot day. But the Heat Smart City Plan is not just a really nice pamphlet to sit on a shelf and gather dust. It's a real map to help us get from here to a more resilient 2030. Because what do we know about 2030? We know that it's going to be hotter. We know that we probably will have experienced more unprecedented, catastrophic weather events driven by climate change. And there's a fair chance that by then, Sydney will have experienced its first 50-degree day. But what else could be true about 2030? It could be that we could be a good way forward to making sure that 100% of social housing in this city is heat safe and energy efficient. We could have made sure that people living in our hottest suburbs can safely catch public transport all through summer. We could have a heat app on our phone that gives us hour by hour, personalised, specific information about how to stay safe in the heat, tailored to you. And if any of these things sound interesting and exciting to you, please join me. Please join so many of the organisations in this room to be part of making this plan a reality. Thank you.
On the buzzer. Yeah. Woo. Right on the buzzer. Way to bring that home, Emma. That was an incredible kickoff to our talks. Next up, we have Danny D'Souza. Now, Danny is the Vice President for ESG and Innovation at Brookfield Properties, but he's also the Chair of Better Buildings Partnership. Welcome, Danny.
So the Better Buildings Partnership, or BBP, was established in 2011 in support of the city's Sustainable Sydney 2030 vision, with a key focus on contributing to the city's emission reduction target, enhancing the sustainability performance of office buildings in the LGA, and promoting the outcomes of the BBP to encourage the adoption of better practices more broadly. The partnership between the City of Sydney and a number of key institutional property owners of Sydney CBD assets and represents approximately half of Sydney's office area. Membership extends to sector participants, including real estate managers and industry bodies. Looking at the city's emission footprint, the commercial sector makes up approximately half, and Better Buildings Partnership member buildings a good proportion of that. And so in the context of the city's emission footprint, what the BBP does matters. As a group, we work to solve collective barriers to sustainability performance. And we have a process where we work to define the problem, identify what good looks like, and build frameworks that help us bridge that gap. And as a group, we've developed a number of resources and toolkits across a broad number of industry-wide challenges. We've seen some of these initiatives be adopted by members within their LGA buildings, expand across to national portfolios, and influence the development of industry rating tools, highlighting the impact and reach of the BBP's work. And this has led to some real achievements by the BBP as a whole. Looking back to our baseline year, we've seen some significant reductions in carbon intensities, but also in resource consumption. We've seen members adopt corporate commitments and targets focused on the BBP's priority areas, and again promoted a series of resource packs and resources for the broader adoption. Later this year, the partnership will enter its fourth phase, focusing on 3 key areas, with specific projects already identified in each. As a partnership, we've got a long belief in the value of collaboration and collective action, and we look forward to continuing this work and facing the next challenges that lie ahead of us. Thank you.
Well done, Danny. With time to spare, no less. And a shout out if your building is not part of the partnership yet. Come find Danny afterwards, get some more information. To bring us home, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Kim McKay AO, who is the Sustainable Destinations Partnership Lead, Director and CEO. She's talking about their project on Sustainable Destinations Partnership. She's at the Museum, Australian Museum. Please welcome Kim.
I'm very cognizant of the fact that all that's standing between you leaving, getting a drink at the pub across the road is me. So I'll try and make it for you. Hey, last year alone, Sydney welcomed over 37 million visitors from interstate and overseas to our city, and they spent an amazing $26.7 billion right here. Tourism in our city is big business, and those visitors stayed for 113 million nights. There's a lot of beds and hotels and sheets and towels and all that other stuff, food, transport, everything. You get the story about that impact. Now, visitors come here for our beautiful waterways and our beaches and Sydney Harbour, the jewel in the crown of our city. I discovered that when I co-founded Clean Up Australia over 35 years ago, and I saw the impact of collective action. Thanks, you can't clap, I have to keep going. The visitors also come to see our parklands and visit places like the Australian Museum, the Art Gallery, the Opera House, and attractions like Taronga Zoo and the Botanic Gardens, and to stay in those world-class hotels. In 2018, the City of Sydney showed real global leadership by forming the Sustainable Destinations Partnership. We signed up right at the beginning. I'm obsessed by this sort of thing. And today, there are over 40 partners from hotels to experiences and cultural venues. In 2027, the Australian Museum turns 200. And I want to make sure that we're going to be here for another 200 years. We've become a leader in climate action in museums globally, led by Dr. Jenny Newell, curator of the AM's Climate Solutions Centre, who's here tonight. And we're doing this through sustainability and climate action plans. It's hard in heritage buildings, where I have to keep 22 million objects and specimens cool all the time. We're reducing our waste through careful procurement and efficient waste management. We're even recycling some of our exhibition walls. We're reducing our carbon footprint by purchasing more renewable energy, and soon we'll be at 100% renewable. And we're researching climate science here and up on our Lizard Island Reef Research Station on the Great Barrier Reef. Our advocacy about sustainability has grown enormously, with 1.5 million people visiting this past year. And we've got a great exhibition called Future Now, which is on now. You can go and see it for free. And we drive people to action through citizen science. Now, the partnership, I haven't even clicked the slides, I'm so obsessed. There you go. This is what's been achieved. I've got 7 seconds. You can see it up there. Huge reduction. Good on you. Thank you for staying for the night. Woo!
I love that. That was such a beautiful mic drop moment at the end there. Kim, it's like, I've got 7 seconds. This speaks for itself. I'm out. Well done. Also, I've never seen anyone deny themselves a clap because they were so focused on the clock in front of them. So, kudos to you on your mission focus there. Can we give a hand? Emma, Danny, Kim, well done. Great job. And what amazing examples of the work that is already happening in this city and the champions within this city who are leading it. I hope that and so much of what we have discussed tonight and the leaders that have been on this stage sharing their ideas and most importantly the way they're putting their ideas to work has inspired you to think about your own. As the Lord Mayor mentioned, the City of Sydney is about to release its updated environmental strategy for public comment. If you would like to know more about the environmental strategy 25-20-30, it will be on public exhibition. You can scan the QR code on your way out and the city would love to hear what you think about it. It's very clear to me tonight, one of the things that has filled my cup tonight is the level of engagement that has been so apparent with this audience. So I hope many of you will take up that opportunity to participate and use your voice. As we heard from our speakers tonight, the next 5 years, this next decade is an absolutely critical period for climate change. So make sure you have your say and make sure you think about the ways you can dial up your action and focus on this important matter. I'd like to thank the Lord Mayor, the speakers, all the panellists, and you you for coming here, for being a part of this conversation, for the cheers, for the engagement, for the fact this is something you are so passionate about that you will be here with us midweek, late into the evening, talking about it and wanting to learn more. With that, a wish for a safe journey home this evening, our thanks for your participation in City Talk, a reminder to go out the side doors on your way, and please keep the conversation going. Share with one person at least something you've learnt tonight, something it sparked for you. Let's make sure this City Talk inspires the action and the urgency we need to move forward positively. Thank you so much, everyone.